She moved through the trees like she belonged to them. Dirt on her face, blood on her knuckles, bow in her hand. Rowena Sky hadn't spoken aloud in 6 days. Not since she set the first fire. Not since the first body dropped in the ravine where they thought she'd die. They'd called her a traitor, a whore, a mistake. But now they called her nothing at all. Because one by one, the men who sold her for gold and whiskey were disappearing into the woods they thought they owned. She wasn't running, she was hunting, and every snapped twig and distant hoofbeat meant one of them was still too stupid to understand. She didn't leave a trail. They were walking exactly where she wanted them to. But that morning, she found a boot print she hadn't planned for. Wide stance, deep heel, a bend in the branch overhead like someone tall had passed through. She crouched beside it, ran her fingers across the soil, and whispered the name she hadn't let herself say since that night by the fire. Cassian. They thought she was running. That's how it looked. One woman, alone in the high pine, dress torn at the seams, shoulders slick with sweat, a bow slung tight across her back. She left just enough tracks to be found, just enough scent for dogs to bark, and just enough blood on the brush to say, she's hurt, she's scared, she's close. But Rowena Sky wasn't scared, and she wasn't running. She was hunting backward. The men on her trail were cocky. They thought they were the story, that this was one last chase, just a loose end to clean up. They didn't know they were the ones being readied for burial. 3 of them rode ahead, heavy on their saddles, guns too visible, mouths too loud. One of them, Kip Morgan, laughed every time he saw a footprint. She's leaving us a trail like a girl wanting to be caught. Rowena heard him. She was just uphill, watching. A squirrel moved beside her elbow. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She knocked the arrow, drew. Kip rode beneath her, jaw slack, and in one breath Rowena reminded him that the last mistake a man makes is thinking the prey's already caught. The arrow didn't hit his heart. It hit the reins. The horse reared. Kip tumbled back, head cracking against a rock. 2 seconds of chaos. 2 seconds more than she needed. The others ran for cover, guns drawn, eyes wild. Rowena was already gone. Back through the trees, boots light. She'd been walking barefoot for a mile, only pulling her boots on to leave deeper prints. It was all theater, all trap, and so far the stage was perfect. By dusk, she was 6 ridgelines away, camped beneath a fallen cedar that smelled like old sap and lightning. She wrapped the string of her bow, laid it gently beside the fire pit, and crouched to strip the bark from a tuber she dug near the stream. She didn't light a fire, not yet, but she'd earned a breath. 1, maybe 2. That's when she saw it. A print. Not like the others. Not like Kip or Jansen or Dooley. This one was wide at the toe, flat at the heel, deep, left-handed turn in the brush. Someone who moved slow, sure, and didn't care who heard him. She crouched beside it, and her stomach twisted. Not from fear, from recognition. Cassian Dorr had always walked like he was ready to die, but not in a hurry to get there. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not on this trail, not on her map, not inside this story. She whispered his name and didn't mean to, then stood and vanished into the trees. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she traced every route in her head, every angle she'd planned, the ambush site near Dead Man's Spine, the creek bed that looped wide around Briar Hollow. Every twist had a purpose. Every fire ring had a reason. But Cassian, he wasn't meant to burn in this story. He was... She stopped herself, because she didn't know what he was anymore. Only what he used to be. They'd ridden together once, a long time ago, before the gold, before the betrayal, before she'd heard her name used like a curse in campfire songs. Cassian had been the one who didn't laugh when she missed a shot, the one who tossed her a coat during storm watches without comment, the one who'd kept his knife in hand when the others got too loud, too drunk, too sure. But he'd stayed silent when they sold her. That was what haunted her more than any bullet. Not what he'd done, but what he hadn't. Now he was in her woods, stepping in places he shouldn't have found, following a trail she hadn't left for him. And worst of all, she didn't know if he was trying to stop her, nor protect her from what came next. By morning, the sky was thick with stormlight. She moved fast, laying the next trap near the ravine. A half-felled pine rigged with tension, just enough to snap when the second man passed beneath. Not to kill, to slow. She didn't want them dead yet, not until they understood why. As she worked, she felt it, the presence, like breath on her neck. She spun, arrow drawn. But it was only the trees, only the wind, only memory. But her hands shook longer than they should have. When she returned to camp, there were two things she hadn't left. One, a length of jerky wrapped in oilskin. Two, a feather laid across her boot heel. Pale gray. Hawk. Their signal once. For, I see you, I won't shoot. She sat hard on the ground, stared at the feather until the sun slipped through the trees. Cassian was close. And worse than that, he remembered. Cassian Dorr had followed many trails in his life. Boot prints through snow, blood smeared across gravel, the bent stem of prairie grass after a wounded man staggered through. But nothing prepared him for the trail she left. It was too neat, too visible, like she wanted to be found, but not by them. He crouched beside a scuffed heel mark near the bend in the ravine. The soil was loose, but the depth told him what he needed. Weight on the right foot, slight limp, slowing pace. She was leading someone, not escaping. He brushed a hand across the edge of the imprint, eyes scanning the pine shadows. Then he whispered to himself, "Rowena, what the hell are you doing?" He remembered her walk before he remembered her face. Back when they rode together, she used to walk like a fuse. Taut, purposeful, with just enough sway to throw off men who underestimated her. He never did. But he still missed it. Not the danger, not even the loyalty. The quiet she brought with her, the way she could sit by a fire and say nothing for an hour, and you'd still feel like you'd had a conversation. He'd betrayed that quiet the night he said nothing at all. The memory never left him. A fire too bright, drunk voices, the sound of a coin purse being tossed too carelessly across the table. And Rowena, standing just outside the circle of light, shoulders stiff, fingers twitching near the handle of her knife. Cassian had been the only one sober enough to see it, the only one close enough to stop it, the only one who said nothing, because he wasn't sure what side he was on. By the time he chose, she was already gone. He spent a year looking for her, not out loud, not with wanted posters or bounties, just following the sound of her name whispered in gambling halls, brothels, and saloons like a ghost story. And now, finally, she'd left him something real, a trail, but it wasn't a cry for help. It was a test. 2 days later, he found the first body, Kip Morgan, neck broken, spine twisted like someone had pushed him from a ledge, or maybe let him fall. Cassian crouched beside the corpse, pulled the coat back. No blood, but there was a cut just beneath the ear, small, clean, deliberate. Mercy cut. Rowena's style. He stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and kept walking. He didn't travel fast. Rowena didn't want speed. She wanted certainty. The way she laid tracks told him everything. Scraped bark on one side only, left-handed pull on a snare she'd reset but hadn't triggered. She knew he was close. She just didn't know what he'd do when he found her. And to be honest, neither did he. That night, he made camp near a creek bed, built a small fire just enough to keep his boots dry. He boiled coffee the way she used to like it, bitter and burned, a single sugar cube melted into the bottom. Old habits die harder than old debts. When the fire was down to coals, he pulled something from his saddlebag, a strip of leather cut from her old rifle strap. He'd kept it. Don't know why. He carved 3 words into it with the tip of his knife. "I'm not with them." Then he nailed it to the post of an old trail marker. He didn't leave his name. He didn't need to. What he didn't know was that she was watching from the ridge above. Rowena hadn't meant to follow his tracks. She told herself she was just circling back, checking for tails. But the moment she saw that wide heel print near the bend in the gulch, she felt something hot twist in her ribs. Cassian. She crouched, stared. He walked like he used to, steady, no hesitation, a slight outward drag on the right foot from that old wound he never let the others see. And the kicker? He wasn't trying to hide. Not from her. From them, maybe. But not from her. She kept her distance. watched as he made camp, as he laid his coat beneath him like he'd done 100 nights on the trail, as he sharpened his blade the same way he used to when he was thinking. Slow, rhythmic, 3 passes left, 3 right. The same man, but not. Older, harder, still as quiet as ever. She remembered how his voice used to warm when he said her name, how he never touched her without asking, except that one time by the river when she'd cried into his collar and he'd held her like something too wild to tame, and then he didn't say a word when the others made her disappear. That silence hurt more than any blow. When he left the leather on the trail marker, she didn't cry, but her hands shook for 10 minutes after. The next morning, she left nothing behind. No prints, no fire, no feather. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive, but she wasn't ready to kill him either, and that meant something. Later that day, Cassian crossed a ridge and saw fresh ash, the remains of a fire, still warm, and beside it, half a sugar cube, unmelted, left intentionally. He crouched, smiled. Just a little. She remembered. Rowena Sky set the fire low, tucked between 2 stones and shielded on the west side with a strip of damp canvas. The flame was barely more than a flicker, enough to warm her fingers, not enough to cast light. She didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Not by him. The sky had darkened fast, bruised with storm and smoke. Rain hadn't come, but the air felt thick, like it was waiting to decide whether to fall or split apart. Rowena sat with her knees pulled to her chest, the bow resting across her lap. Her fingers traced the worn edge of the grip again and again, like it might tell her what to do. She'd been here before, in this canyon, this bend in the rocks. 3 years ago, she and Cassian had camped here while waiting for a courier to pass through. He'd built the fire. She'd gutted a hare, and they'd said nothing for hours until he'd taken off his coat and laid it over her knees without asking. She hadn't needed it, but she hadn't returned it either. That coat had hung behind her door for a year after he stopped riding with her. She burned it the day she heard he'd taken a bounty contract from Royce Benedict. Now he was here, not with Royce, not with the others, but with eyes still full of things he hadn't said, and steps too familiar to mistake. She'd know that heel drag anywhere. Below the ridge, 2 of the men she had expected were making camp, Dooley Barnes and Jansen Keck, ugly inside and out. They were too loud, too lazy, and too sure of themselves. She could hear their laughter echo off the rocks, obscene and sharp. They'd chased her for weeks. Didn't know they'd arrived exactly where she wanted them. She pulled the small satchel from her side pack and unrolled it. Inside, a set of iron nails, black powder, a worn scrap of fuse, and a tin whistle. She'd rigged something for them. Not to kill yet, just to scare, scatter, slow. The killing would come later, after they looked her in the eyes and remembered what they'd done. She waited until the moon dipped behind the ridgeline. Then she moved, silent, crouched low, her steps landing where moss or mud softened the earth. It took her 12 minutes to reach their camp. They were arguing over rations. Who'd eaten the last of the jerky? Who snored louder? She slipped behind the boulder that sat just outside their fire ring, reached into her pack, pulled a length of soaked rope, tied to a flask of oil. The trap was simple, but it didn't need to be complicated. Men like them didn't notice until it was too late. She lit the fuse, slow and steady, then turned to slip back into the dark. That's when she saw it. A boot print, half-shadowed, just outside the range of the fire, facing her camp. And it wasn't new. It was fresh and too damn familiar. Her heart caught mid-beat. Cassian, not just near, close. So close he'd passed right behind her while she set the trap. Did he know? Was he trying to help? Trying to stop her? She ducked behind a tree, mouth dry. Then, boom! The fire trap snapped. Sharp, fast. Just powder and flash, no shrapnel. Men shouted. One fell. The other ran in the wrong direction. Rowena didn't stay to watch. She ran uphill, chest tight, bow in one hand, knife in the other. Not because she was afraid of them, but because she felt him near, and didn't know if she wanted to run toward him or away. Cassian stood beneath a pine not 50 yards from her fire, arms crossed, rifle slung but untouched. He'd heard the trap go off. He didn't move, didn't smile, just watched the trail like it might confess something. He heard her before he saw her, twigs snapping, her breath just off rhythm, the way she breathed when she wasn't sure what she'd done. She stepped into view, didn't draw her bow, didn't speak, just looked at him, and he looked back, then soft. "I know what you're doing," she stiffened. "Do you?" "I know why." She took a step closer. "You think you're here to stop me?" He shook his head. "I'm here to make sure no one else dies who didn't deserve it." "Then you're already too late." Cassian stepped forward, but she raised her hand, not with a weapon, with the leather strip, his message. "I saw it," she said. "And I haven't decided what it means yet." Neither of them moved for a long time. Then she said, quieter now, "You were the only one who didn't speak for me that night. You didn't stop them. You didn't say yes. But you didn't say no either." "I know," he replied, "and I've been following you ever since." She should have drawn the bow, should have walked away, should have stayed angry, but her legs bent, and she sat, right there in the dirt beside him. "I'm down to 2 names," she whispered. "Jansen and Royce." Cassian nodded. "I'll take one." She turned. "You'd kill for me now?" "No," he said, "but I'll kill beside you." It started with the sound of a matchstick. Rowena struck it against her boot heel, the flame small and stubborn in the morning wind. She held it to the oil-soaked rag at the base of the cedar post and stepped back as the fire caught. The post crackled, then split with a hiss. Inside the hollow, what used to be a moonshine barrel, was a letter. 4 lines. No name. Just words burned in her own handwriting. "I didn't run. I waited. Now it's your turn. R." She left it where the others would find it and kept moving. Cassian rode beside her now, not ahead, not behind. They hadn't spoken much since the fire trap, but she'd let him walk inside her shadow, and that meant something. When she mapped out the terrain near Bitterwash, he didn't ask how she knew the land. When she drew lines in the dirt and marked where the shots should fall, he just nodded. And when she handed him a bullet with a red mark scratched into its base, he didn't ask who it was for. He only said, "I'll take the shot when you say." Jansen came first. He was sloppy. Always had been. Even before the betrayal, he'd been the type to shoot first, drink second, ask questions never. He rode into the canyon just before dusk, dust rising off his horse like a warning. Cassian lay prone across the slope, rifle set, breath steady. Rowena stood out in the open, her coat open, hands at her sides, no weapon drawn. She let him see her, let him recognize what was walking toward him. Jansen pulled his pistol. Too late. Cassian didn't miss. The echo bounced off the rock 3 times. By the 4th, Rowena was already kneeling beside the body, pulling a coin from the dead man's vest and slipping it into her pocket. Cassian watched her from above, didn't ask, but he saw the tremble in her hand when she stood. They rode west that night, quiet. No fire. She didn't look at him. But when they stopped, and she handed him a strip of dried apple from her pack, he took it. And that was their way of saying, "This isn't over, but we're still in it." Royce was harder, not just because he had more men, but because he knew she was coming. He wasn't running, he was waiting. They found his camp near an old mining claim, shutters blown out, broken stovepipe, rusted tin roof flapping in the wind. But the firewood was fresh. The horses tied too loose to be abandoned, and Rowena saw it instantly. He was luring her in. "This one's mine," she said. Cassian didn't argue, but he loaded 5 rounds and said, "If you don't come out by sundown, I'm coming in." She nodded, then added, "Don't bring flowers." He smiled, tired, crooked, honest. "Wouldn't know which ones you liked anyway." She entered the shack at a lean, silent, controlled, every step like punctuation on the end of a long sentence. Royce sat in a chair like a man in church, hands folded, gun laid across his knees. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just said, "Never thought you had it in you." She stared. "That's the problem. You never thought." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She didn't, but she didn't shoot either. He laughed. "You're here to kill me, so do it." "No," she said. "I want you to know why first." She told him everything. What it was like waking up in a shack with blood dried on her collar. What it felt like to realize they'd left her for dead, not because they had to, but because it was convenient. How she spent 6 months healing in silence, with no name, no coin, no coat. How she remembered every man who turned his back, except one. Royce listened, didn't interrupt. But when she stepped closer, he reached for his pistol. She was faster. The arrow hit his hand. Then the second hit his thigh. He screamed, collapsed. She stepped closer, knelt beside him, and whispered, "You should have killed me properly." Then drew her knife. When she walked out of the shack, her hands were clean, but her eyes weren't. Cassian stood, rifle lowered. She walked straight past him, didn't say a word. But when he followed, she didn't stop him. And when he laid his coat across her shoulders at camp that night, she let it stay there. Rowena Sky was never unsure with a bow in her hand. Not the first time she held one. Not the first time she notched an arrow. And not the first time she'd looked a man dead in the eye with the tip of her aim resting somewhere between his ribs and his regret. But this wasn't just any man. And this wasn't just any shot. Cassian Dorr stood 20 paces away, hat in his left hand, nothing in the other, no rifle, no knife, no words. She had him in her sights, and still she couldn't let go. The pine needles under her boots crackled as the wind shifted. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the ridge, casting gold over the edges of everything. It would have been beautiful if her hands weren't shaking. Not from fear, from recognition, from memory, from something she didn't want to call love, because it didn't fit right in her mouth anymore. She'd swallowed that word years ago, and it had never gone down smooth. "You shouldn't be here," she called out. Cassian didn't move. "I told you this wasn't your fight." He raised his chin slightly, voice low. "It is now." Rowena drew the bow back tighter. "Don't make me choose," she warned. "I'm not," he said. "I already chose." The silence between them thickened. In the space of 5 heartbeats, she remembered everything. How he used to pass her canteen first, before the others. How he kept 2 bedrolls but only ever used one. How he knew when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. And how he'd stood there that night, just outside the circle of firelight, when they made the deal that sent her to die. He hadn't spoken up, hadn't raised a hand, hadn't tried to stop it. That silence was louder than any gunfire that came after. "Why didn't you stop them?" she asked. He closed his eyes. "I thought, if I stayed close, I could fix it after." "Fix it?" she barked. "They sold me, Cassian. I wasn't stolen. I was traded like something they were done using." "I know," he said. "No, you don't. You weren't the one in that shack. You didn't have blood dried on your chest, or bruises you didn't earn." "I know," he repeated, "but I saw what they became, and I see what you've become since." Her aim dipped just slightly, only slightly, but enough. Cassian took 1 step closer. She drew the string tighter again. "Don't," she said. "I swear I'll do it." He nodded. "I believe you." "Then stop walking." "I can't," he said. "Why?" "Because you're the first person I've followed in years that didn't lead me somewhere worse." That stopped her breath. Somewhere in the pine above them, a bird called out, sharp and short. The trees rustled. The air between them shifted again. And suddenly, she didn't feel like the one with the weapon anymore. She felt like the one who might break first. "I buried you," she whispered. Cassian raised an eyebrow. "In the woods outside Burnt Ridge. I carved a mark in a tree. It was supposed to mean you were dead to me." He took another step. "And yet here I stand." She laughed once, bitter, breathless. And that's the problem. He was 5 paces away now, close enough for her to smell him. Still the same mix, iron, pine, and dust. Still the same quiet underneath everything. Only now there was something else in his eyes. Not apology, not regret, not a plea. Just stillness, and something else she couldn't name. "I thought you came to stop me," she said. "No." "To judge me?" "No." She swallowed hard. "Then why?" He reached up, slow, and placed his hat on the branch beside him. "To make sure you don't forget there's someone left who never wanted you gone." Rowena's grip on the bow loosened. The string trembled. The arrow wobbled slightly. She looked at it, then at him, then lowered it. Not all the way. Just enough. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "You don't have to. I don't know if I can forgive you. I wouldn't ask you to." She stepped forward. "Then what the hell do you want, Cassian?" He looked at her like it hurt, and then softly. "To be the last man standing who doesn't want anything from you but your name." She stared at him, long and hard, and then she handed him the arrow. He took it like it was glass, and they stood there palm to palm like the war wasn't over, but maybe, for a moment, it could wait. Later that night, they built a fire together. First time since before the betrayal. Cassian didn't speak unless she did. She didn't reach for him, but she didn't flinch when he sat close. And when the wind picked up and blew ash over their boots, she didn't move away when his coat brushed her shoulder. She just said, "You never flinched." He turned. "You aim true. I always do." He looked at the sky, and she looked at him, and they didn't need to say the rest, because some shots don't need to be fired to land. The trail ended in silence. Not the kind that creeps after gunfire or the one that falls between strangers. This was the silence between two people who had run long enough and realized there was nowhere left worth running to. Rowena Sky stood on the porch of the abandoned mercantile, hands wrapped around a tin cup. The steam curled into the dry morning air, the way old ghosts rise when nothing is left to haunt. Cassian was inside, fixing a shelf that had leaned too far west. Like it, too, was trying to escape something. Neither of them said much anymore, but not because there wasn't anything to say, because sometimes when you've already pointed a weapon at someone's heart and didn't let go, every silence after that becomes a kind of vow. 3 weeks had passed since Royce Benedict's blood soaked into the roots of those pines. Rowena hadn't touched her bow since. It hung on the nail by the door, string loosened, grip worn smooth. Still close, still visible, but no longer part of her hands. Cassian, for his part, had built a cot, a second chair, repaired the hinge on the back door so it no longer creaked like regret. And still, he never asked to stay. He just did. And that, more than anything, was why she let him. The town wasn't really a town. 4 buildings, one functioning well, a trail that forked too early. But people passed through now and then, looking for rest, warmth, a place that didn't ask questions. Rowena didn't smile at them. Cassian did, but not too much. He smiled with the corner of his mouth, the way someone smiles when they've seen enough to know not to trust it. Still, folks stayed. An extra night, an extra story, an extra reason to remember there are places where survival isn't the only thing offered. One afternoon, a young girl came with her brother. Barefoot, hungry, faces like wind had carved lines in them too early. Rowena handed her a biscuit. The girl asked, "Are you married?" Cassian was on the roof, hammer midair. Rowena just said, "No." The girl looked at the small porch, the shared tools, the coat hung beside the bow. Then asked, "Why not?" Rowena paused, then replied, "Because no one here owns anyone." That night, Cassian sat beside her at the fire. No coat, just the stars overhead and the warm hush of shared presence. "You ever think about it?" he asked. "Marriage," she said, dry, number stopping. She sipped slow. "I thought I did." "You didn't," he said. She turned toward him. He continued, "You killed the ones who needed killing. But you didn't stop. You shifted." Rowena looked at the bow. "It still feels like running, just slower." Cassian nodded. "That's all any of us are doing." She stood suddenly, walked inside. When she returned, she wasn't holding the bow. She was holding the dress, the one she had planned to burn, again. But this time, she unfolded it slow, laid it across her lap, looked down at it not like it was a reminder of pain, but a marker of who she no longer was. "I used to think this meant I belonged to someone." Cassian said nothing. She ran a hand down the bodice, "But maybe it just meant I survived them." The next morning, she took out her knife, cut the dress apart, piece by piece, laid the silk into strips, and over the next 3 days, she sewed it into curtains. They hung pale blue and white across the single room. They didn't block much light, but they let the wind in softly. Cassian touched the fabric once, quietly, then said, "Looks better there than on fire." A week later, someone brought a baby goat to trade for nails. Rowena didn't ask names. Cassian didn't ask what happened to the mother. But the goat stayed, and now there was bleeding at dawn. Another reason to get up. Another reason to stay. One evening, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a single sheet. It read, "I heard what you did. If you ever ride east, there's work. No questions." Cassian read it, folded it, burned it. Rowena asked nothing, and that was her answer. They started building a second room. No plans, just shared tools. He cut wood. She hammered. Sometimes they argued about beams and alignment. Sometimes they laughed. Once he stepped on a nail and cursed so colorfully she didn't speak for 5 full minutes. Later that night, she stitched his sock back together without telling him. He found it in the morning and just stared at it for a while. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. They still didn't say love. Not because it wasn't there, but because it had grown past language. Like moss on stone. Like fire in coals. Like an arrow that never needed loosing because it never missed its mark to begin with. One day, Rowena carved their initials into the back of the bench. Didn't tell him. He noticed a week later, running his hand over the letters like he was afraid they might vanish. Then he picked up the knife and carved a small hawk feather beneath them. No words, just the old signal. "I see you. I won't shoot." They never married. They never left. But they stayed. Through thunder and drought, through strangers and scars, through nights where she woke breathless and he just reached out. No questions, only presence. The bow stayed on the wall, but so did the coat. And sometimes in the quiet just before the sky turned gold, Rowena would reach for Cassian's hand and not pull away. She never said, "I love you." He never asked her to. But in the way they sat side by side, building something small in a world that had tried to break them, you could feel it. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with music or vows. Sometimes it's just choosing to stay, to share silence, to carve your name into a piece of wood and trust it won't be erased. Rowena didn't lower her bow, but she stepped closer. And for a man who never flinched, that was enough. Did this story leave something in your chest too? Tell us below, what moment stayed with you the longest? And where in the world are you watching from tonight? We read every single comment.